A Mafia boss broke down at his son's funeral, crying for the first time in 40 years. But hidden behind the trees, his 16-year-old son stood watching, very much alive. The boy had staged his own death to save his father's life, and now both were hunting the same traitor. The rain fell like bullets on the black umbrellas. Vittorio Leone stood at the edge of the freshly dug grave, staring at the mahogany casket being lowered into the earth. His hands were steady. His face was stone. 40 years of running the most feared crime family in the city had taught him one thing: never show weakness. But when the first shovel of dirt hit the wood, something inside him cracked. His knees buckled. The umbrella slipped from his hand. And Vittorio Leone, the man who had ordered executions without blinking, who had built an empire on blood and fear, fell forward onto the wet grass and sobbed like a child. "Marco," he whispered into the mud. "My boy. My son." Behind him, 50 men in black suits stood motionless. Capos, soldiers, enforcers, all watching their boss break apart. None of them moved. None of them spoke. They had never seen him cry. Not when his wife died. Not when rival families came for his territory. Not even when he took a bullet to the chest 3 years ago. But now, for his 16-year-old son, Vittorio Leone wept openly. What none of them knew, what Vittorio himself didn't know, was that Marco wasn't in that casket. 50 meters away, hidden behind a line of tall cypress trees at the edge of the cemetery, Marco Leone pressed his back against the rough bark and tried not to make a sound. His left arm was wrapped in bloodied bandages. His ribs screamed with every breath. The explosion 6 days ago had nearly killed him. The fire, the falling beams, the shrapnel that tore through his shoulder. He should be dead. Everyone thought he was. But Marco was very much alive. And right now, watching his father collapse at his own grave, Marco felt something he hadn't expected. Guilt. He had planned this. Staged his own death. Let everyone believe the warehouse explosion had taken him. It was the only way to protect his father from what was coming. The only way to buy time. But seeing Vittorio like this, broken, destroyed, crying into the dirt, Marco's chest tightened with a pain worse than any wound. "I'm sorry, Papa," he thought. "But if I hadn't disappeared, you'd be in that grave instead." The funeral procession began to move. One by one, the men in suits approached the grave, dropping white roses onto the casket. Vittorio remained on his knees, unmoving, as if the world had stopped turning. Marco's hand instinctively moved to the burn scar on his neck. The explosion replayed in his mind, not the way everyone else remembered it, but the way it actually happened. He had been in the warehouse that night, yes. But he wasn't supposed to be. He'd followed his father's consigliere, Angelo, after overhearing a strange phone call earlier that day. Angelo had been whispering in rapid Italian, mentioning the shipment and clearing the path. Marco had a bad feeling. Angelo had been with the family for 20 years, but lately, something felt off. The way he looked at Vittorio. The private meetings. The phone calls that ended abruptly when someone entered the room. So Marco followed him. The warehouse was supposed to be empty. Instead, Marco found Angelo meeting with 3 men he didn't recognize, men in expensive suits with Russian accents. They were standing around crates marked with shipping labels from Odessa. But it wasn't drugs or weapons inside. It was explosives. Marco had hidden behind a stack of pallets, close enough to hear everything. "The device is set for Friday night," one of the Russians said. "When Leone arrives for the inspection, the entire building goes up. No body, no evidence. Just another accident."
Angelo nodded.
"And the boy." "What boy?"
"Leone's son. Marco."
"He's been asking questions. Getting too close." The Russian shrugged. "If he's here, he's collateral. Easier that way." Marco's blood ran cold. They were planning to kill his father. And if Marco got in the way, they'd kill him too. He had 2 choices: run to his father and warn him, or disappear and let them think they'd succeeded. If he warned Vittorio, the traitors would know they'd been discovered. They'd move up the timeline. Change the plan. Strike before Vittorio could prepare. And Marco had no proof, Just a conversation he overheard. Angelo would deny it. The Russians would vanish. And the family would tear itself apart from the inside. But if Marco died, if everyone believed he was gone, Angelo would feel safe. He'd think the plan was working. He'd get sloppy, make mistakes, and Vittorio would survive. So Marco made his choice. He triggered the explosion early, planted his jacket and his watch near the blast zone, set the charges to blow while he escaped through the loading dock. He almost didn't make it. The blast caught him mid-run, throwing him through a window. Shrapnel tore into his shoulder. His head cracked against concrete. When he woke up, he was in the back of a car, bleeding and barely conscious, being driven away by someone he didn't recognize. It wasn't until later that Marco learned the truth. The old family doctor, Luca, had been at the warehouse that night by coincidence. He'd seen Marco crawling through the wreckage and pulled him out before the second explosion hit. Luca was retired, loyal, and smart enough to know that if Marco was running from that blast, there was a reason. "You want to stay dead?" Luca had asked him in the safe house. Marco nodded, gripping his wounded shoulder. "For now. Then you're a ghost." Back at the cemetery, Vittorio finally stood. His legs were unsteady, but his face had returned to stone. He wiped his eyes once, just once, and turned to his men. "Everyone out," he said quietly. "I want to be alone with my son." The capos hesitated, but Angelo stepped forward, placing a hand on Vittorio's shoulder. "Boss, you shouldn't be," I said.
Get
"Out." The venom in Vittorio's voice made everyone step back. Angelo raised his hands in surrender and nodded to the others. Within seconds, the cemetery was empty except for Vittorio and the grave. Behind the cypress trees, Marco held his breath. Vittorio walked slowly around the grave, his hands clasped behind his back. Then he spoke, not loudly but clearly, as if Marco could somehow hear him from 6 feet under. "I failed you," Vittorio said. "I thought keeping you away from the business would keep you safe. I thought if I didn't tell you the truth about what I do, you'd have a normal life. But I was wrong." Marco's throat tightened. "You were curious.
smart.
Too smart. You asked questions I couldn't answer. And now," Vittorio's voice cracked. "Now you're gone because I wasn't honest with you." Marco wanted to scream, "I'm right here, Papa."
I'm alive.
But he couldn't. Not yet. Vittorio knelt again, pressing his hand flat against the wet dirt. "I don't know who did this to you, but I will find them. And when I do," his hand curled into a fist, "I will make them wish they'd never been born." Then Vittorio stood, turned, and walked away without looking back. Marco watched his father disappear through the cemetery gates. And for the first time since the explosion, Marco allowed himself to cry. The safe house smelled like old tobacco and disinfectant. Marco pushed through the rusty metal door, wincing as the movement pulled at his shoulder wound. The abandoned motel on the edge of the city had been closed for 15 years, but Dr. Luca had kept one room operational, a secret clinic for family members who couldn't risk hospitals. "You're late," Luca said without looking up. He was 73, with hands that still moved like a surgeon's despite decades of retirement. "I told you 2 hours. The wound needs cleaning." Marco collapsed onto the stained mattress. "I had to see it. The funeral." Luca turned, his expression hard. "And? Feel better now?" he cried. Marco's voice was barely a whisper. "I've never seen him cry." "Good. Maybe it'll keep him cautious." Luca grabbed his medical kit and moved toward Marco. "Shirt off. Let me see the damage." Marco peeled away his hoodie, revealing the bandages wrapped around his torso and left shoulder. Dark red had seeped through in several places. Luca clicked his tongue in disapproval as he began unwrapping the gauze. "You tore 3 stitches. What did I tell you about moving too much?" "I had to go." "You had to risk infection and discovery because you're sentimental." Luca pressed a cotton pad soaked in antiseptic against the wound. Marco hissed in pain. "Your father thinks you're dead. That's what's keeping you alive. Don't waste it." Marco stared at the water-stained ceiling. "How long do I have to stay dead?" Until we know who wants you that way. The truth had been eating at Marco for 6 days. He knew Angelo was involved. He'd heard the conversation. But Angelo wasn't working alone. The Russians proved that. And if Angelo had the resources to bring in foreign operatives, it meant the conspiracy went deeper than one traitor. It meant someone else in the family was helping him. Luca, Marco said carefully. The night you found me, you said you were at the warehouse by coincidence. Luca didn't look up from restitching the wound. I was. Why were you there? The old doctor's hands paused for just a fraction of a second. Then continued. I got a call. Said there was someone hurt at that location, and I should bring medical supplies. Marco's blood went cold. Someone called you? Before the explosion? About 10 minutes before. Did you recognize the voice?
No.
It was disguised. Electronically altered, Luca tied off the stitch and reached for fresh bandages. At first I thought it was a setup. But then the building exploded, and I saw you crawling out. So, I made a choice. Marco's mind raced. Someone had called Luca. Someone knew Marco would be at that warehouse. Someone wanted him found alive, but believed dead by everyone else. Why didn't you tell me this before? Luca met his eyes. Because I wanted to see if you'd figured out yourself. Figure out what? That you weren't the target, Marco. Luca secured the bandage and stepped back. Your father was. You were supposed to be collateral damage, a bonus that would destroy him emotionally. But someone else was watching. Someone who didn't want you dead. Marco sat up too quickly, ignoring the pain. Who? I don't know. But whoever it is, they're playing a different game than Angelo. Luca washed his hands in the cracked sink. Angelo wanted you both gone. But this other person? They wanted you hidden. Protected. Which means they need you for something. The room suddenly felt smaller. Marco had assumed the explosion was simple, Angelo trying to eliminate Vittorio and anyone who might interfere. But if someone else had intervened, called Luca, ensured Marco survived. They're using me, Marco said slowly. Keeping me alive as leverage. Or, as a backup plan, Luca dried his hands. Either way, you're more valuable alive than dead. For now. Marco spent the next hour at the battered laptop Luca had stolen from a pawn shop. He'd been careful not to access any of his personal accounts. Those would be monitored. But his father's organization ran on old-school encrypted channels, systems built in the early 2000s that no one had bothered to update. Systems Marco had taught himself to hack when he was 14. He navigated through layers of security, using backdoors he'd discovered years ago during late-night explorations of his father's office computer. Vittorio never knew his son had access. Marco had been careful, watching, learning, never taking anything or leaving traces. Now those skills might save both their lives. He found the communication logs from the week before the explosion. Encrypted messages between Angelo and an unknown contact. The encryption was military-grade, but Marco had time and patience. After 40 minutes of running decryption algorithms, one message broke through. Friday night. Warehouse 7. Device planted in HVAC system. When VL arrives for inspection, remote detonation.
Clean sweep. No witnesses.
Angelo's response. What about the son? Eliminate if present. He's been asking questions about the Volkov shipments. Becoming a liability. Marco's hands trembled. The Volkov shipments. He'd heard that name before. His father had mentioned it once during a phone call, something about a new partnership with Eastern European distributors. Vittorio had seemed uneasy about it. Marco dug deeper into the archives. What he found made his stomach drop. The Volkov family wasn't a partnership. They were a takeover. For the past 8 months, they'd been slowly buying out Vittorio's suppliers, bribing his contacts, turning his allies. Angelo had been facilitating it from the inside, feeding them information, weakening the Leone Empire piece by piece. The explosion wasn't just about killing Vittorio. It was about making it look like an accident so the Volkovs could absorb the territory without a war. With both Vittorio and his heir dead, the family would fracture. Angelo would step in as temporary leader, then hand everything to the Russians in exchange for a fortune and a new life. Marco sat back, his heart pounding. His father wasn't just in danger from one explosion. He was in danger from an entire coup that had been building for months. And Marco was the only one who knew. The Leone estate was silent. Vittorio stood in Marco's bedroom, untouched since the day of the explosion. Basketball posters still hung on the walls. Textbooks sat stacked on the desk beside a half-finished chemistry assignment. A hoodie draped over the chair still smelled faintly of his son's cologne. Vittorio picked up a framed photo from the nightstand. Marco at 13, grinning with a basketball under his arm. Back when things were simpler. Back when his biggest worry was making the school team. "Boss," Angelo's voice came from the doorway. "The capos are waiting. We have the meeting about the Southside territory in 20 minutes. Vittorio didn't turn around. "Cancel it." "Boss, this is the third meeting you've." "I said cancel it." Vittorio set the photo down carefully. "Tell them I'll reschedule." Angelo stepped into the room, concern etched on his face. "Vittorio, I know you're grieving, but the family needs you. The Russians are pushing into our territory. The Colombians are asking questions about shipments. If you don't show strength now, get out, Angelo." The consigliera hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Of course. I'll handle things until you're ready." The moment Angelo left, Vittorio's jaw tightened. He walked to the window, overlooking the garden where Marco used to practice shooting hoops. Everything reminded him of what he'd lost. But something else gnawed at him. Something that had been growing since he'd stood at that grave. The explosion felt wrong. By evening, Vittorio sat in his study with a bottle of scotch and a burning question. Marco had been careful, smart. He never went anywhere without telling someone. He planned everything, thought through consequences. It wasn't like him to be at a random warehouse at night. Unless he had a reason. Vittorio pulled out his phone and dialed. 3 rings, then a gruff voice answered. "Santino. I need you and Paolo for a private job." Santino Russo had been with the family for 18 years, a former detective who'd switched sides after Vittorio saved his daughter from a kidnapping. If anyone could find the truth, it was him. "What kind of job, boss?" "The warehouse explosion that killed my son. I want you to go back there. Check everything. The blast pattern, the debris, the chemical residue. Everything the official investigators found, and everything they missed." A pause. "Boss, the fire marshal already ruled it." "I don't care what they ruled. Something doesn't add up." Vittorio's voice dropped to ice. "And Santino? Tell no one. Not the capos. Not Angelo. No 1 inch." "Understood." 2 hours later, Vittorio received a visitor he didn't expect. Father Dominic, the priest who'd conducted Marco's funeral, stood in the doorway of the study. He was 60, with kind eyes and gray hair that had gone white in the past decade.
"Vittorio."
"May I come in?" Vittorio gestured to the chair across from him. "I'm not in the mood for condolences, Father. I'm not here to give them." Father Dominic sat down, folding his hands. "I'm here because I saw you at the cemetery today, after everyone left." Vittorio poured himself another drink. "And you were talking to Marco." Promising revenge, the priest leaned forward. "Vittorio, grief can make us see enemies where there are none. The explosion was investigated. It was an accident, faulty wiring, gas leak. These things happen. Not to my son, they don't. You think someone killed him deliberately?" Vittorio stared into his glass. "I think my son was too smart to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. I think someone wanted him there. And I think until I know who and why, everyone around me is a suspect." Father Dominic's expression grew troubled. "Including your own men?" "Especially my own men." Vittorio drained his glass. "You know what I've learned in 40 years, Father? The knife that kills you doesn't come from your enemies. It comes from the person standing closest." That night, Vittorio couldn't sleep. He walked through the empty halls of his home, past family portraits and expensive furniture that meant nothing without Marco. His wife had died giving birth to their son. For 16 years, Marco had been everything, his reason to build the empire, his reason to protect what they had. Now that reason was gone. Vittorio found himself in the security room, watching playback footage from the days before the explosion. He scrolled through cameras, looking for anything unusual. Then he saw it. 3 days before the warehouse explosion, Marco had left the estate at midnight. The camera caught him slipping out through the garden gate, wearing dark clothes, carrying a backpack. Vittorio's chest tightened. Where had he been going? He checked the next night. Same thing. Marco leaving at midnight, returning at 3 in the morning. On the third night, the night of the explosion, Marco had left at 11:30 and never came back. Vittorio's hands gripped the desk. His son had been investigating something, following someone, and whatever he'd found had gotten him killed. Or had it? A memory surfaced, something Marco had said 2 weeks before he died. They'd been having dinner, and Marco had asked casually, "Papa, do you trust everyone who works for you?" Vittorio had laughed it off. In this business, you don't trust anyone completely. What if someone close to you is lying? Would you know? At the time, Vittorio thought it was teenage philosophy. Now, the question haunted him. Marco had suspected something. Someone. And Vittorio had dismissed it. He pulled out his phone and texted Santino. "Speed up the investigation. I want answers in 48 hours. Then he sat back in the darkness, his mind racing. If someone in his family had killed his son, Vittorio wouldn't just destroy them. He'd burn the entire empire to the ground and rebuild it on their ashes. The restaurant was closed, but the back room was alive with smoke and tension. Angelo sat at the head of a long table, 5 men surrounding him, 3 Russians in tailored suits and 2 of his own soldiers. The air smelled like expensive cigars and desperation. "It's done," Angelo said, tapping ash into a crystal tray. "The boy is buried. Vittorio is broken. Give him another week and he'll be too unstable to lead. The Kapos will ask me to step in." Dmitry Volkov, the eldest of the Russian brothers, leaned back in his chair. His face was scarred from a knife fight in Moscow, a jagged line running from his temple to his jaw. "And the territory transfer? Once I'm in control, I'll arrange the handover. 3 months, maybe 4. Slow enough that nobody suspects. Fast enough that you get what you paid for." Dmitry's brother, Alexei, wasn't as patient. He was younger, hungrier, with cold blue eyes that never blinked. 4 months is too long. Every day we wait, someone else could move in. The Colombians, the Irish. We didn't pay you $500,000 to maybe deliver. Angelo's jaw tightened. This is delicate work. If I move too fast, the Kapos will revolt. They're loyal to Vittorio, not to me. I need time too. You need to stop making excuses. Alexei pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. "Look." Angelo picked up the phone, his stomach sinking. On the screen was a grainy photograph from a traffic camera near the cemetery, time-stamped from earlier that day. In the background, partially obscured by cypress trees, was a thin figure in a dark hoodie. The image was blurry, but the posture was unmistakable. Angelo's throat went dry. "Where did you get this?" "We have people watching the cemetery." Making sure Vittorio was really grieving, really broken, Dmitry leaned forward. "Imagine our surprise when we saw this. It's a shadow. Could be anyone. Could be..." Alexei tapped the phone. "Or it could be the dead boy who's supposed to be 6 feet underground." The room went silent. One of Angelo's soldiers, a thick-necked enforcer named Enzo, spoke up. "Boss, if the kid's alive, we've got a serious problem."
He knows too much.
"He was at the warehouse that night. That's why we moved up the timeline." Angelo's mind raced. Marco had been there. He'd seen the meeting with the Russians, heard the plan. That's why Angelo had given the order to detonate early. Better to kill the boy and risk Vittorio's suspicion than let Marco expose everything. But if Marco survived, "We need to be sure," Angelo said slowly. "One blurry photo doesn't prove anything." Dmitry pulled the phone back. "Then make sure. Search the city. Check hospitals, clinics, safe houses. If the boy is alive, find him. And this time, don't leave it to chance. And if I find him..." Alexei smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Kill him. Properly this time.
No explosions, no accidents.
A bullet in the head, and a body we can see. 20 minutes later, Angelo stood outside the restaurant, smoking a cigarette with trembling hands. If Marco was alive, everything collapsed. The plan had been perfect. Kill Vittorio and his heir in one strike. Blame it on faulty equipment. Let the family fall apart from grief. Angelo would step in as the steady hand during crisis, consolidate power, and slowly sell everything to the Volkovs piece by piece. But Marco, alive, changed everything. The boy was smart. Too smart. If he'd survived the explosion, he'd survived for a reason. He was hiding, planning, waiting for the right moment. And if he came back with proof of the conspiracy, Angelo pulled out his phone and made a call. It's me. I need eyes on every clinic, every underground doctor in the city. Someone might be treating a teenage boy for explosion injuries, burns, shrapnel wounds, broken bones. The voice on the other end was skeptical. That's a lot of ground to cover. What's this about? Just do it. Quietly. No questions. Angelo paused and put word out on the street. $20,000 for information leading to a kid matching Marco Leone's description. No names, no reasons. Just the money. 20 grand? Boss, that'll draw attention. I don't care. Find him. Angelo hung up and took a long drag from a cigarette. He'd built this plan for 2 years. Cultivated relationships with the Volkovs. Positioned himself as indispensable to Vittorio. Slowly poisoned the family's operations from the inside. He wasn't going to let a 16-year-old boy ruin it. Back inside, Dmitri and Alexei sat alone in the private room. You think he can handle this? Alexei poured himself vodka from a crystal decanter. Dmitri shrugged. Angelo is weak. But he's useful. He knows the family's operations, their contacts, their secrets. Once we have full control, we can dispose of him. And if the boy really is alive, then Angelo had better find him fast. Dmitri raised his glass. Because if Marco Leone shows up and exposes this operation, we won't just lose the territory. We'll have a full mob war on our hands. Alexei smiled. Would that be so bad? Wars create opportunities. Wars create bodies. Dmitri drank. And I prefer profit to corpses. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. What is it? Alexei asked. Dmitri turned the phone around. It was another surveillance photo, this one from a different angle near the cemetery. The same hooded figure. Closer this time. The face was still hidden, but something about the build, the stance. That's him, Dmitri said quietly. That's Marco Leone. Alexei leaned forward, studying the image. You're certain? I've seen photos of the boy. That's him. Dmitri zoomed in on the image, focusing on the figure's left arm, which hung slightly lower than the right, as if injured. And look, he's hurt, which means he needs medical help, which means he's vulnerable. Alexei grinned. Time to go hunting. Marco stared at the laptop screen, his eyes burning from 6 straight hours of digging through encrypted files. The abandoned motel room was dark except for the blue glow of the monitor. Luca had gone to get supplies, leaving Marco alone with the stolen equipment and a growing sense of dread. He'd broken through another layer of Angelo's communications, messages dating back 18 months. What he found made his blood run cold. The explosion wasn't meant for him at all. Marco scrolled through a conversation between Angelo and someone identified only as DV, Dmitri Volkov, he assumed. DV. The timeline moves forward. VL must be eliminated before he discovers the supply chain restructuring. Angelo. He's starting to ask questions about the shipment delays. I can stall him 2 weeks, maybe 3-inch. DV. 2 weeks. Then we move. The device will be placed during his inspection.
No witnesses.
Angelo. What about collateral damage? DV. Acceptable. The warehouse workers are expendable. If family members are present, even better. The more tragedy, the more chaos. Chaos is opportunity. Marco's hands clenched into fists. He kept reading. 3 days before the explosion, another message appeared. Angelo, problem. The sun has been following me. He was outside the restaurant last night during our meeting. I don't know how much he heard. DV, can you control him? Angelo, he's 16 and thinks he's smarter than everyone. If he tells his father what he suspects, we're exposed. DV, then ensure he's at the warehouse. Friday night. Problem solved. Marco leaned back, his breath coming in short bursts. They hadn't planned to kill him specifically. He was supposed to be collateral damage, a bonus that would devastate Vittorio emotionally, making him easier to destroy. But that wasn't even the worst part. Marco opened another file, this one containing financial records. His hands shook as he read through the transactions. For 18 months, Angelo had been systematically draining the Leone family's resources. Money from legitimate businesses was being funneled through shell corporations, then redirected to Volkov accounts. Shipments were being delayed or lost, suppliers were being bought out by Volkov intermediaries. The Leone Empire wasn't just under attack. It was being hollowed out from the inside. And the explosion? That was supposed to be the final blow. With Vittorio dead, the family would fracture. The Capos would fight for control. Angelo would step in as the stable choice, the trusted consigliere who could hold things together. Then, piece by piece, he'd hand everything to the Volkovs. Marco's father wouldn't just lose his life. He'd lose everything he'd built. His legacy, his family's name, all of it would become property of the Russian mob, and no one would ever know the truth. You bastard, Marco whispered, staring at Angelo's messages. You weren't just killing him. You were erasing him. A noise outside made Marco freeze. He closed the laptop and moved to the window, peering through the broken blinds. The motel parking lot was empty except for Luca's old sedan and a stray dog sniffing through garbage. But something felt wrong. Marco's instincts, the same instincts that had saved him at the warehouse, were screaming at him. He grabbed the backpack Luca had left for emergencies, containing cash, a burner phone, and a small knife. Then he heard it, voices low and urgent, coming from the other side of the motel. Said he might be here. Check every room. This place has been abandoned for years. You really think? 20 grand says I check every room twice. Marco's heart hammered. Angelo's men. They'd found him. He moved fast, shoving the laptop into the backpack and slinging it over his good shoulder. The window in the bathroom was small but open to the back alley. He could squeeze through if he hurried. The door handle rattled. Marco climbed onto the toilet, ignoring the pain screaming through his ribs and shoulder. He pushed the window open and pulled himself through, dropping into the alley just as he heard the motel room door crash open behind him. He was here. Laptops warm.
Marco ran.
3 blocks away, gasping and dizzy from pain, Marco ducked into the doorway of a closed pawn shop and pulled out the burner phone. He couldn't go back to the motel. Couldn't risk leading them to Luca. Couldn't trust anyone in his father's organization because he didn't know who else Angelo had corrupted. He was alone. Marco's finger hovered over the numbers. He could call his father right now. Tell him everything. Vittorio would mobilize the entire family, hunt down Angelo, destroy the Volkovs. But then what? Angelo would claim Marco was confused, traumatized, lying. The financial records were encrypted and illegal to obtain. The Russians would disappear. And the real traitor, whoever had called Luca to save Marco's life, would remain hidden in the shadows.
No.
Marco needed more than evidence. He needed proof that couldn't be denied. And he needed to understand why someone wanted him alive. Marco opened a different encrypted channel on the phone, one he discovered in Angelo's files but hadn't accessed yet. It was labeled insurance. Inside were videos. The first one showed Vittorio meeting with the Colombians 6 months ago, discussing territory agreements. Nothing unusual. The second showed 2 of Vittorio's capos executing a rival gang member. Brutal, but part of the business. The third video made Marco's stomach drop. It showed Vittorio, drunk and angry, 3 years ago. He was shouting at someone off camera, Marco's mother's brother, Uncle Gio, who disappeared shortly after. You stole from me.
Vittorio screamed.
You think I wouldn't find out? You think family protects you from this? A gunshot. Uncle Gio collapsed. Vittorio standing over the body, gun in hand. Marco felt sick. Angelo had been collecting evidence against his father for years, building an insurance policy. These videos could send Vittorio to prison for life, or get him killed by rival families who'd use them as justification for war. And if Marco came forward now, Angelo would release everything. His father wouldn't just die. He'd be destroyed, disgraced, remembered as a murderer and a tyrant. Marco closed the phone, his hands shaking. The truth was worse than he'd imagined. To save his father's life, he might have to let him believe his son was dead forever. Santino and Paolo met Vittorio in the underground parking garage beneath his estate at midnight. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete. Vittorio stood beside his black Mercedes, arms crossed, his face unreadable. But his eyes, those told a different story. They burned with something dangerous. Tell me, Vittorio said quietly. Santino pulled out a tablet, his expression grim. Boss, we spent 12 hours at the warehouse site. Checked everything the fire marshal's report claimed. And then we checked what they didn't mention. And Paolo, the younger of the two, stepped forward. He was an explosives expert before joining the family, military background, decorated service until he got dishonorably discharged for reasons nobody talked about. The official report says natural gas leak combined with faulty electrical wiring, Paolo said.
Simple accident.
Happens all the time in old buildings. But Vittorio's jaw tightened. But the blast pattern doesn't match a gas explosion. Paolo swiped through photos on the tablet. See this? Gas explosions expand outward from the source, creating a relatively uniform debris field. This warehouse? The destruction is concentrated in 3 specific areas: the loading dock, the office section, and the storage room. Santino zoomed in on one of the photos. 3 different blast points, boss. That's not an accident. That's a coordinated detonation. Vittorio felt ice spread through his chest. Someone planted devices. Multiple devices, Paolo confirmed. And here's the thing, we found residue at all 3 sites. Chemical composition doesn't match natural gas or any standard industrial material that would have been stored there. What does it match? C4. Military-grade plastic explosive. Paolo's voice was steady, but his eyes showed concern. Whoever did this had professional equipment and training. This wasn't some amateur hit. The parking garage was silent except for the hum of the lights. Vittorio's hands curled into fists. The fire marshal missed this. Or was paid to miss it, Santino said carefully. The report was filed within 18 hours of the explosion. That's unusually fast for a scene this complicated. Someone wanted it closed quickly. Who signed off on the report? Fire Marshal Davidson. He's been in the department 30 years, clean record, Santino paused. But 2 days after he filed the report, he deposited $50,000 into his personal account. Claimed it was an inheritance from a dead aunt in Florida. An aunt who doesn't exist, Paolo added. We checked. Vittorio's mind raced. $50,000 to close the investigation. 3 coordinated explosions. Military-grade equipment. This wasn't a simple hit. This was a professional operation with serious money behind it. What about witnesses? Vittorio asked. Anyone see something that night? Santino shook his head. The warehouse was supposed to be empty. Your inspection was scheduled for 11 p.m. Someone moved the time up and didn't tell anyone. Who changed the schedule? According to your calendar, Angelo made the adjustment. Said there was a conflict with another meeting. Vittorio's blood turned to ice.
Angelo.
His consigliere for 20 years. The man who'd stood beside him through wars with the Colombians, the Irish, the Chinese gangs. The man who'd held Marco as a baby and promised to protect him always.
Boss.
Santino's voice cut through his thoughts. There's more. Vittorio looked up. We pulled security footage from businesses near the warehouse. Most cameras were disabled that night, probably by whoever planned this. but we found one they missed. Small electronics shop 3 blocks away with a camera pointed at the street. Santino played a video on the tablet. Grainy footage showed the warehouse district at 10:47 p.m., 13 minutes before the explosion. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the warehouse loading dock. 3 men got out, carried equipment inside, then left 8 minutes later. Can you identify them? Not their faces. But look at the license plate. Santino zoomed in. The plate was partially obscured, but visible enough. Russian diplomatic plates. Russians, Vittorio said slowly. In my warehouse. Planting bombs. And leaving 13 minutes before your son died, Paolo added quietly. The pieces were falling into place, and Vittorio didn't like the picture they formed. Russian operatives. A paid-off fire marshal. Angelo changing the schedule. And Marco, his smart, curious, careful son, somehow ending up at that warehouse at exactly the wrong time. Or exactly the right time, if someone wanted him there. There's one more thing, boss. Santino hesitated. We found this in the debris. He held up a clear evidence bag. Inside was a piece of burned fabric, part of a jacket. But attached to it was something that made Vittorio's heart stop. A button. Not just any button. A custom-made brass button with the Leone family crest, a lion with a crown. Marco had a jacket with these buttons. Vittorio had it made for his son's 16th birthday 3 months ago. But something was wrong with it. The button was found 30 meters from the main blast site, Santino said. Near the loading dock exit. Like someone dropped it while running away. Vittorio took the bag, his hands shaking. You're saying Marco was running before the explosion? We're saying someone wearing his jacket was at the loading dock when the bombs went off, Paolo corrected carefully. Could have been Marco. Could have been someone who took his jacket. But either way, boss, someone was trying to escape. Vittorio stared at the button, his mind spinning. What if Marco hadn't died in the explosion? What if he'd seen something, learned something, and run? What if his son was alive? The thought was too painful to hope for and too important to ignore. I want surveillance on Angelo, Vittorio said, his voice like steel. Every move he makes, every call he takes, everyone he meets. Don't let him know he's being watched. Boss, if Angelo finds out, then be careful. Vittorio looked at both men. Because if my son died because of someone in my own house, I won't just kill them. I'll erase them from history. He handed back the evidence bag. Find me the truth. And, if there's even a chance Marco is alive. Vittorio's voice broke for just a moment. Find him. Marco knew it was a mistake the moment he stepped outside. 3 days hiding in an abandoned apartment building had left him low on supplies. The wound on his shoulder was healing, but Luca had warned him about infection. He needed antibiotics, fresh bandages, and food that wasn't stale bread and canned soup. Stay put, Luca had said that morning before leaving to check on another patient. I'll get what you need. But Luca had been gone for 6 hours, and Marco's fever was climbing. He could feel the heat radiating from his shoulder, see the red streaks beginning to spread across his skin. If he waited any longer, the infection would kill him faster than Angelo's men. So Marco pulled on a dark hoodie, wrapped a scarf around his face, and stepped into the afternoon streets of the city. The pharmacy was 4 blocks away. Marco kept his head down, hands in his pockets, moving with the flow of pedestrians. The city felt different now, every face a potential threat, every glance a possible recognition. He'd grown up in these streets. His father owned half the businesses, had connections in every neighborhood. People knew the Leone name.
People knew Marco's face.
Which meant he had to become invisible. Inside the pharmacy, Marco grabbed what he needed quickly. Antibiotic ointment, sterile gauze, medical tape, pain relievers. He added a bottle of water and a protein bar, then moved to the counter. The cashier was a middle-aged woman who barely looked at him as she scanned the items. $43. Marco paid in cash, bills he'd taken from Luca's emergency stash, and turned to leave. That's when he saw them. 2 men in leather jackets standing outside the pharmacy, smoking cigarettes. They looked casual, relaxed. But Marco recognized the stance, the way they scanned the street, the subtle hand positions near their waistbands. Enforcers. Family soldiers. And they were watching the pharmacy entrance. Marco's pulse spiked. He couldn't go out the front. He turned and walked quickly toward the back of the store, past the prescription counter. "Hey," the cashier called. "Sir, you can't." Marco pushed through the employees-only door and found himself in a storage room. Boxes of inventory stacked against the walls, a metal door leading to the alley. He grabbed the handle. Locked from the outside. "Damn it," Marco muttered. Footsteps behind him, the cashier coming to investigate. Marco looked around desperately and saw a small window near the ceiling, the kind that opened for ventilation. He climbed onto a stack of boxes, his shoulder screaming in protest, and pushed the window open. It was barely wide enough for his body, but he didn't have a choice. Marco squeezed through, dropping into the alley just as he heard the storage room door open behind him. He ran. Not the smart, calculated movement he'd practiced. Just pure survival instinct, feet pounding pavement, breath coming in ragged gasps. The scarf fell from his face. The hood slipped back. Marco turned a corner into a crowded street market, weaving between vendors and shoppers. His shoulder throbbed with every step. The pharmacy bag swung from his good hand. Behind him, he heard shouting. There. The kid in the black hoodie. Marco's blood turned cold. They'd seen him. They were following. He ducked into a narrow alleyway between two apartment buildings, knocking over a trash can to slow his pursuers. The alley opened onto another street, this one less crowded, more industrial. A mistake. Marco realized it too late. Fewer people meant fewer places to hide, less chaos to disappear into. He was exposed. A black sedan screeched around the corner ahead of him, cutting off his escape. Two more men got out, both reaching inside their jackets. Marco spun, trying to double back, but the first two enforcers had entered the alley behind him.
Trapped.
"Easy, kid," one of them said, hands raised but eyes cold. "Nobody needs to get hurt. Just come with us." Marco's mind raced. 4 armed men. 1 injured teenager. The math didn't work. "Who sent you?" Marco asked, buying time, scanning for any escape route. "Does it matter?" The enforcer stepped closer. "You're coming with us either way. Boss wants to talk." "Which boss?" A flicker of surprise crossed the man's face.
Angelo. He's worried about you.
"Wants to make sure you're safe." Liar. Angelo wanted him dead. Marco's hand tightened on the pharmacy bag. Inside was a glass bottle of antiseptic, not much of a weapon, but something. "I'm not going anywhere," Marco said. The enforcer's expression hardened. "Then we do this the hard way." He moved forward, but Marco was faster. He threw the pharmacy bag directly at the man's face, then dove toward a fire escape ladder on the building to his right. His fingers caught the lowest rung. Pain exploded through his shoulder as he pulled himself up, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Gunshots cracked behind him. Bullets pinged off the metal fire escape. Marco climbed desperately, not looking down, focusing only on the next rung, the next level, the roof. "Don't kill him," someone shouted. "Angelo wants him alive." More shots, but aimed at his legs now, trying to disable rather than kill. Marco reached the 3rd-floor landing and kicked hard at a window. Glass shattered. He threw himself through into a dark apartment, rolling across the floor. An elderly woman screamed from her kitchen.
"Sorry."
Marco gasped, already running toward the front door. He burst into the hallway, found the stairwell, and ran down instead of up, the unexpected choice. He could hear the enforcers climbing the fire escape, expecting him to go to the roof. Marco hit the ground floor and exited through the building's back entrance into a different alley. This one connected to the old warehouse district, the same area where he'd died. He knew this territory. Had explored it as a kid when his father brought him to inspections. Marco disappeared into the maze of abandoned buildings, finally collapsing behind a dumpster 3 blocks away. His shoulder was bleeding again, the stitches torn. His lungs burned. But he was alive. He pulled out the burner phone with shaking hands and texted Luca. "Compromised. Can't come back. They know I'm alive." The response came 30 seconds later, Stay hidden. I'll find you. Don't move. Marco leaned his head back against the brick wall, closing his eyes. Angelo knew he was alive now, which meant the hunt had officially begun. And Marco was running out of places to hide. The docks smelled like salt, diesel fuel, and rotting fish. Vittorio stood in the shadows of Warehouse 12, watching a cargo ship being unloaded under the harsh glare of floodlights. His two bodyguards flanked him, hands resting on concealed weapons. This was one of Angelo's shipments, a container of automotive parts from Eastern Europe. But Santino's surveillance had revealed something interesting. The manifest had been altered 3 times in the past week, and the shipping company was registered to a shell corporation in Moscow. Vittorio wanted to see what was really inside those crates. "Boss, we should have more men," one bodyguard whispered. "This area isn't secure." "That's why we're here quietly," Vittorio replied. "If Angelo knows I'm investigating his shipments, he'll cover his tracks." Below, dock workers loaded crates onto trucks. Standard procedure. Nothing obviously suspicious. But Vittorio's instincts, sharpened by 40 years of survival, told him something was wrong. 400 meters away, on the roof of an abandoned cannery, Marco watched the same scene through a pair of stolen binoculars. He'd been tracking Angelo's movements for 2 days, using the encrypted communications he'd hacked. Tonight's shipment was flagged as priority, which meant it was important enough for Angelo to inspect personally. Marco needed to know what was in those containers. If he could find physical evidence of the Russian operation, something concrete he could use, maybe he could finally expose Angelo without destroying his father in the process. The roof was cold, and his shoulder ached despite the antibiotics he'd managed to steal from a veterinary clinic. But Marco stayed focused, scanning the dock through the binoculars. That's when he saw him. His father. Marco's breath caught. Vittorio stood in the shadows near Warehouse 12, barely visible in the darkness. But Marco would recognize that silhouette anywhere. The broad shoulders, the military posture, the way he held himself like a man ready for violence. "Papa," Marco thought, his chest tightening. "What are you doing here?" Then, understanding clicked. His father was investigating, just like Marco was. They were hunting the same truth from different directions, neither knowing the other was alive and so close. Marco adjusted the binoculars, zooming in on his father's face. Vittorio looked older, harder. The grief had carved lines into his features that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. His eyes were cold, scanning the docks with predatory focus. Marco's hand trembled. He was 20 meters away. He could call out, could reveal himself right now. But Angelo's men were everywhere, and Marco still didn't have the proof he needed. Below, Vittorio's phone buzzed. A text from Santino. "Angelo just arrived. South entrance. 3 men with him."
Vittorio tensed.
If Angelo was here personally, this shipment was critical. "Stay alert," he told his bodyguards. "Angelo's coming." They melted deeper into the shadows, watching. A black SUV pulled up to the south entrance. Angelo stepped out, straightening his expensive suit. 3 enforcers followed him. Marco recognized 2 of them from the pharmacy chase. Through the binoculars, Marco saw Angelo approach the foreman, exchange words, then gesture toward one specific container. The workers moved quickly to unload it, using a forklift to set the crate down separately from the others. Angelo personally inspected the seal, then nodded. The workers pried it open. Even from the roof, Marco could see what was inside: weapons. Not handguns or shotguns, but serious military hardware. Assault rifles, RPGs, what looked like plastic explosives in brick form. Enough firepower to start a war. Marco's blood ran cold. This wasn't about territory or money anymore. The Volkovs were arming Angelo for something bigger. Something catastrophic. He pulled out his phone and started taking photos, zooming in on the crate numbers, the weapons, Angelo's face. That's when the roof beneath him creaked. Vittorio heard it too, a subtle sound from above, like weight shifting on old metal. He looked up toward the cannery roof, dark against the night sky. No obvious movement. But something was up there. "You two stay here," Vittorio ordered his bodyguards. I'm checking something. Boss, wait. Vittorio was already moving, circling around the warehouse toward the cannery. His hand rested on the gun at his waist. Years of hunting men had taught him to trust these instincts. Someone was watching. Someone who didn't belong. Marco saw his father break away from the shadows and head toward the cannery. Panic surged through him.
No, no, no.
Don't come up here. If Vittorio found him, everything would explode. Angelo would know Marco was alive. The investigation would be exposed. And his father would demand answers Marco couldn't give without revealing the insurance files, the videos that could destroy Vittorio's legacy. Marco had to leave.
Now.
He crawled backward on the roof, trying to stay quiet, but his injured shoulder made movement awkward. His foot caught on a piece of loose metal sheeting. The screech of metal on metal echoed across the docks. Below, Angelo's head snapped up. Who's there? The enforcers drew their weapons, scanning the rooftops. Marco abandoned stealth and ran, staying low as he crossed to the far side of the cannery. There was a fire escape on the north end, rusted but functional. He reached it just as he heard footsteps pounding up the internal stairwell, his father, coming from below. Marco swung onto the fire escape and started climbing down. 3 floors. Then 2. Gunfire erupted. Angelo's men had spotted him. Bullets sparked off the metal railing. Marco jumped the last 8 feet, landing hard on the concrete dock. His ankle screamed in protest, but he forced himself to run. Behind him, he heard Vittorio's voice shouting, "Stop shooting. I want him alive." Marco sprinted toward the water's edge, where old fishing boats were moored. Behind him, footsteps.
Shouts.
More gunfire. He reached the edge of the dock and looked back one final time. His father stood at the cannery entrance, gun drawn, staring directly at him across 50 meters of darkness. Their eyes met for just a second. Recognition flickered across Vittorio's face. Confusion, disbelief, desperate hope. Then Marco jumped. The cold water of the harbor swallowed him whole. He kicked hard, swimming underwater, his lungs burning, his shoulders screaming. He stayed under as long as he could, then surfaced behind a cargo barge 200 meters away. Searchlights swept the water where he'd jumped. Angelo's men shouted orders. Boats were being mobilized. But the current was strong, and Marco let it pull him away from the docks, deeper into the harbor's darkness. As he floated there, treading water with one good arm, Marco heard his father's voice carrying across the water. Marco. The anguish in that single word broke something inside him. But Marco stayed silent. He let the darkness swallow him, and disappeared once again. Vittorio stood at the water's edge until sunrise, long after Angelo's men had given up the search. His clothes were soaked from wading into the harbor. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from the impossible hope that had ignited in his chest. Marco was alive. He'd seen him, just for a second, but it was enough. The build, the movement, the eyes that had looked back at him with recognition and fear. His son was alive. Boss, one of his bodyguards approached carefully. We should go. Angelo's asking questions about why you're here. Vittorio didn't move. What did you tell him? That you couldn't sleep. Wanted to check on operations personally. And he believed that. Does it matter? He knows someone was on that roof. He knows they escaped. The bodyguard paused. He's scared, boss. Really scared. Good. Let him be scared. Vittorio finally turned away from the water. His mind was racing, reorganizing everything he thought he knew. The explosion. The funeral. The grief that had nearly destroyed him. All of it based on a lie. But if Marco was alive, why hadn't he come home? Why was he hiding, running, living like a fugitive? The answer was obvious, because coming home would get him killed, which meant the threat was inside the family. Someone Marco couldn't trust. Someone close enough to hurt them both.
Angelo.
Vittorio returned to his estate at dawn, exhausted but electric with purpose. He went directly to his study, locked the door, and called Santino. I need everything you have on Angelo. Every financial record, every phone call, every meeting. I don't care how you get it. And I need it by tonight. Boss, what happened at the docks? Just do it, Vittorio hung up. He poured himself a scotch with shaking hands. His son was alive. After 2 weeks of crushing grief, of visiting that grave, of crying into the dirt, Marco was alive. And someone had tried to kill them both. Vittorio's grief transformed into something sharper, more dangerous. He'd been weak, distracted by loss. But now he understood. This was war. And in war, you didn't mourn until the battle was won. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Boss. Angelo's voice. Can we talk? Vittorio composed himself, buried the rage beneath a mask of exhaustion.
Come in.
Angelo entered, concern etched on his face, but Vittorio could see past it now. The performance. The careful manipulation. I heard you were at the docks last night, Angelo said. Is everything all right? Just checking on operations. Couldn't sleep. At 4 a.m? Angelo sat down uninvited. Vittorio, I'm worried about you. You haven't been yourself since Marco died. The men are starting to notice. They need to see strength, not what? Grief. Vittorio's voice was cold. My son died, Angelo. I'm allowed to grieve. Of course. But there's grieving, and then there's this. Disappearing in the middle of the night. Questioning operations you've trusted me to handle for 20 years, Angelo leaned forward. Talk to me. What's really going on? Vittorio studied him. The concerned expression. The gentle tone. 20 years of friendship made it almost believable. Almost. I'm fine, Vittorio said. Just needed air. Angelo didn't look convinced, but he nodded. All right. But if you need anything, I'll let you know. After Angelo left, Vittorio sat in silence, rage building behind his calm exterior. 20 years. He'd trusted this man with everything. With his business. With his family. With his son's safety. And Angelo had betrayed it all. The package arrived at noon. One of the estate guards brought it to Vittorio's study. A small cardboard box, no return address, left at the front gate. Should I call the bomb squad? The guard asked. Vittorio stared at the box. Something told him this wasn't a bomb. Leave it, and close the door. Alone, Vittorio opened the package carefully. Inside was a black hoodie, still damp and smelling of harbor water. Marco's hoodie. Vittorio recognized it immediately. His son had been wearing it the night he disappeared. Beneath the hoodie was a bullet casing. 9mm, recently fired. And folded at the bottom was a note, handwritten in block letters. Stay out of this, or your son dies twice. Vittorio's hands clenched around the note, crumpling it. This was a message. A threat. Someone knew Marco was alive. Someone had shot at him at the docks. And now they were warning Vittorio to back off. But the message contained a fatal mistake. It confirmed what Vittorio had suspected. His son was alive. And someone wanted to keep Vittorio from finding him. Vittorio picked up his phone and called Santino. Forget what I said before. I need everything on Angelo in 3 hours, not tonight. Every account, every contact, every dirty secret. Boss, that's 3 hours. And Santino? Our most trusted men. The ones who were with us before Angelo joined. I want them ready to move. Move where? Wherever I tell them to. Vittorio's voice was ice. We're going to war. That evening, Vittorio stood in Marco's bedroom again, holding the damp hoodie. He brought it to his face, breathing in the scent. His son, alive, real, out there somewhere hiding in fear. I know you're alive, Vittorio whispered to the empty room. I don't know why you're hiding. I don't know who you're hiding from. But I promise you this, Marco. Whoever tried to kill you, whoever is threatening you now, I will find them. He set the hoodie down carefully on Marco's bed. And when I do, they'll wish they'd never been born. Vittorio's phone buzzed. A text from Santino. Got the files. You need to see this.
Now.
Vittorio took one last look at his son's room, then walked out. The hunt was over. Now came the reckoning. Across the city, in a different abandoned building, Marco sat with his back against the wall, shivering from the cold swim and fever. Luca was cleaning his wounds again, muttering about infections and stupidity. "They found me at the docks," Marco said quietly. "My father saw me. I know he did." "Did he recognize you?" "I think so." For just a second, Marco closed his eyes. "I heard him call my name." Luca was silent for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Marco's voice cracked. "If I go to him now, Angelo will know I'm alive. He'll release those videos. My father's enemies will use them to destroy him. But if I stay hidden, your father might get himself killed looking for you." Marco nodded, tears streaming down his face. He was trapped between two impossible choices: save his father's legacy or save his father's life. And time was running out to choose. The cemetery was different at night. Vittorio stood at Marco's grave, alone in the darkness, his hand resting on the cold marble headstone. It was midnight, exactly 2 weeks since the funeral that had broken him. But now he knew the truth. The grave was empty. His son was alive.
And someone wanted to keep it that way.
Santino's files had revealed everything: Angelo's offshore accounts, the payments from Volkov's shell corporations, the intercepted communications about the warehouse explosion. 20 years of loyalty had been a lie. Angelo had been selling the Leone empire piece by piece, and the assassination was supposed to be the final transaction. Vittorio had come to the cemetery tonight with a purpose. He'd leaked his location to Angelo through a compromised phone, making it look like another grief-stricken visit to his dead son. But this time he was ready. Hidden among the tombstones, 6 of his most trusted men waited in the shadows, soldiers who'd been with the family before Angelo, men whose loyalty had been tested in blood. If Angelo wanted Vittorio dead, the cemetery was the perfect trap. Empty, isolated, poetic. "Come on," Vittorio whispered into the darkness. "Come finish what you started." 300 meters away, Marco watched through binoculars from the bell tower of an old church. He'd hacked Angelo's phone that afternoon, breaking through the encryption with techniques he'd learned from online forums during sleepless nights. What he found made his blood run cold: a text thread between Angelo and the Volkov brothers, planning an ambush. "Angelo, he'll be at the cemetery tonight. Midnight. Sentimental fool keeps visiting the grave. Dmitri. How many men will he have?" "Angelo. 2, maybe 3. He thinks he's being careful, but he's emotional."
Weak.
"This is our chance." "Alexei. We'll send 8. No mistakes this time. When it's done, you take control of the family." Marco had stared at the screen, his heart pounding. His father was walking into an ambush, and he had no idea it was coming. Marco knew what he had to do, even if it meant exposing himself. Even if it meant everything he'd sacrificed, the staged death, the hiding, the pain, would be for nothing. He couldn't let his father die. Not when he could stop it. At 12:17 a.m., they came. 8 men in dark clothes, moving silently between the tombstones like shadows. Professional. Coordinated. Each carrying suppressed weapons. Vittorio saw them approaching and stepped behind Marco's headstone, drawing his gun. His 6 men emerged from their hiding spots, weapons raised. "That's far enough," Vittorio called out. The attackers froze. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Angelo stepped into view, hands raised in false surrender.
"Vittorio.
"I tried to warn you. Tried to tell you to stay home tonight. Did you?" Vittorio's voice was ice. "Or did you plan this?" Angelo's expression shifted, the concern dropping away, replaced by cold calculation. "You've been digging where you shouldn't, asking questions, making problems. About the warehouse explosion? About Marco?" "Marco was collateral damage," Angelo's voice hardened. "Just like you're about to be." He dropped his hands, the signal. Gunfire erupted. Marco saw it unfold through the binoculars and ran. He burst from the church tower, sprinting across the cemetery grounds. His shoulder screamed. His lungs burned. But he pushed harder, faster. The gunfight was chaos. Vittorio's men were outnumbered, but better positioned. Bodies fell. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness. Marco reached the outer wall of the cemetery and pulled himself over, ignoring the pain. He could see his father pinned behind a large tomb, returning fire at 3 attackers closing in from different angles. One of the attackers raised his weapon, aiming at Vittorio's exposed side. Marco didn't think.
He just acted. Papa.
Left side. His voice cut through the gunfire. Vittorio spun, firing instinctively at the attacker Marco had warned him about. The man went down. But now everyone knew someone else was there. Angelo's head snapped toward Marco's voice. Find him. The boy is here. 2 men broke from the fight and ran toward Marco's position. Marco drew the handgun Luca had given him, an old revolver, 6 shots, rusty but functional. He'd never fired a gun at a person before. Never wanted to. But watching the men charge at him with murder in their eyes, Marco found his resolve. He aimed at the lead attacker and fired. The recoil shocked him, but the bullet found its mark. The man stumbled and fell. The second attacker raised his weapon, but a shot from behind the tombstones dropped him first. Vittorio emerged, smoking gun in hand, staring at the spot where Marco's voice had come from.
Marco.
His voice cracked with desperate hope. Where are you? Marco stepped into the pale moonlight filtering through the trees. For a moment, father and son stood 20 meters apart, separated by tombstones and bodies, staring at each other as if seeing a ghost. Vittorio's gun lowered slowly. You're alive.
I'm alive, Papa.
But the explosion, the funeral, I buried you. I know.
I'm sorry.
I had to. Another gunshot interrupted them. Angelo, wounded but still standing, had fired at Marco. The bullet whizzed past Marco's head. Vittorio moved without thinking, stepping between his son and Angelo, returning fire.
Angelo dove ben da tombstone.
Marco, get down.
Vittorio shouted.
But Marco was already moving, circling around the other side. He had 3 bullets left and a clear angle on Angelo's position.
Angelo.
Marco called out. It's over. I have copies of everything. The financial records. The communications with the Volkovs. The videos you collected on my father. Angelo's laughter echoed from behind the stone. If you had proof, you would have used it already. You're bluffing. Am I? Marco pulled out his phone, holding it up. Should I send these files to every capo in the family right now? Let them see how you've been stealing from them for 2 years. Silence. Then Angelo emerged, gun still in hand but lowered slightly. His face was bloody, his suit torn. You think this changes anything? The Volkovs own half the city now. Even if you expose me, they'll still come for your father. Then we'll fight them together, Vittorio said, stepping beside Marco. Like we should have from the beginning. Angelo's expression twisted with rage. You had everything, Vittorio. Power, respect, an empire. And you let it make you soft. Let your love for that boy blind you. He raised his gun toward Marco. 3 shots fired simultaneously. Angelo's body jerked and fell. Marco and Vittorio stood side by side, guns still raised, smoke curling from the barrels. Behind them, one of Vittorio's soldiers lowered his weapon as well. The cemetery fell silent except for the ringing in their ears. Then Vittorio turned to his son, dropped his gun, and pulled Marco into an embrace so tight it hurt his injured shoulder. But Marco didn't care. I thought I'd lost you, Vittorio whispered, his voice breaking. I thought you were gone. I was trying to save you, Marco said, tears streaming down his face. I heard the plan. I couldn't let them kill you. So you died instead. I had to. Vittorio pulled back, holding Marco's face in his hands, studying every feature as if memorizing him again. Never again. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Understood.
Marco nodded.
Together. The cemetery felt like sacred ground now, not for the dead, but for the truth. Vittorio kept one hand on Marco's shoulder as they stood over Angelo's body, as if afraid his son might vanish again. The remaining attackers had either fled or been captured by Vittorio's men, who were now securing the perimeter. "Boss," Santino approached, holstering his weapon. "What do you want us to do with the bodies?" Vittorio didn't take his eyes off Marco. "Leave Angelo here. Let the police find him in the morning. The others, make them disappear."
And Santino?
Not a word about Marco to anyone. Not yet. Understood. Santino glanced at Marco with undisguised shock. "It's good to see you, kid." Marco managed a weak smile. "You too." After Santino left, Vittorio finally released Marco's shoulder and took a step back, really looking at him. The injuries, the haunted eyes, the way his son had changed in just 2 weeks. "You're hurt," Vittorio said, noticing the way Marco favored his left side. "The explosion." "I barely got out." Marco touched his bandaged shoulder. "Dr. Luca's been helping me." Luca knew. Vittorio's voice held a note of betrayal. "He let me grieve while knowing you were alive. I made him promise. Papa, I needed you to believe I was dead. Angelo had to think the plan worked, that you were vulnerable. If you'd known I was alive, you would have acted differently. He would have known something was wrong." Vittorio wanted to be angry, but he understood the logic. His son had played the same game Vittorio had taught him. Sacrifice the peace to protect the king. "Tell me everything," Vittorio said. "From the beginning. Why were you at that warehouse?" Marco took a breath and began. The overheard phone call. Following Angelo. The meeting with the Russians. The plan to kill Vittorio during the inspection. The explosives. "They mentioned me," Marco said quietly. "One of the Russians asked what to do if I was there. Angelo said I was collateral damage, that it would be easier if I died too." Vittorio's fists clenched. "So, you triggered the explosion early." "I had to. If I ran to you with what I'd heard, Angelo would have denied it."
Change the plan.
"We had no proof, just my word against his." "But if everyone thought I died in the accident," Marco looked up at his father, "then Angelo would think he was safe. He'd make mistakes. And you'd be alive. You staged your own death to protect me." "Yes." Vittorio felt something crack inside his chest, pride and pain mixed together. His 16-year-old son had sacrificed everything to save him. "The funeral," Vittorio said, his voice thick. "You were there, watching."
Marco nodded.
"I had to see it. Had to know it worked. But seeing you like that," his voice broke. "I'm so sorry, Papa. I never wanted to hurt you. You saved my life." Vittorio pulled Marco close again. "Don't apologize for that." They stood there for a moment, father and son, surrounded by tombstones and bodies, a strange place for a reunion, but somehow fitting. "There's more," Marco said, pulling away. Angelo wasn't working alone. The Volkov family, Russian mob, they've been infiltrating your operations for over a year. Buying out suppliers, turning contacts, draining accounts. Angelo was feeding them information, weakening the family from inside. "I know." Santino found the financial records. "But there's something else. Something worse." Marco pulled out his phone. "Angelo was collecting insurance. Evidence against you. Videos, recordings, documents. Things that could send you to prison or get you killed by rival families." Vittorio's expression darkened. "What kind of evidence?"
Marco hesitated.
This was the part he'd been dreading. 3 years ago. Uncle Gio. Angelo recorded it. The color drained from Vittorio's face. "The video exists?"
Yes.
"And it's not the only one. Angelo has recordings of hits, deals, confessions, everything. He was going to use them to control the transition of power to the Volkovs. If anyone questioned him taking over, he'd threaten to release the files." Vittorio's mind raced. "Where are they now?" "Cloud server. Encrypted. But I have the access codes." Marco met his father's eyes. "That's the other reason I couldn't come to you right away. If I exposed Angelo too soon, he might have released everything out of spite. Your enemies would have used those videos to destroy you. And now we control them. I copied everything to a separate drive, then deleted Angelo's backups. As far as anyone knows, the insurance files died with him. Vittorio stared at his son with new understanding. Marco hadn't just saved his life. He'd protected his legacy, his reputation, everything he'd built. You thought of everything. I tried. Marco looked exhausted. But Papa, the Volkovs are still out there. Dmitri and Alexei, they funded this whole operation. Even with Angelo gone, they'll come for the territory. They've invested too much to walk away. Let them come. Vittorio's voice was steel. They think they weakened us.
Killed my son.
Made me vulnerable. He placed both hands on Marco's shoulders. But they don't know you're alive. They don't know we have their communications, their financial trails, their entire conspiracy documented. And they definitely don't know we're coming for them. Marco managed a small smile. Together? Together, Vittorio pulled out his phone. I'm calling a meeting with the capos. Tomorrow night. The ones I trust. We tell them the truth. You're alive. Angelo is a traitor, and we're going to war with the Volkovs. What about the ones you don't trust? Vittorio's expression was cold. We identify them. Then we eliminate them. No more traitors. No more snakes in the family. Marco nodded, understanding the necessity even if it made him uneasy. But first, Vittorio said, his voice softening, we get you proper medical care. A real bed.
Food.
You look like you haven't slept in weeks. I haven't. Then let's go home. Vittorio wrapped an arm around Marco's good shoulder, guiding him toward the cemetery exit. Your room is exactly how you left it. I couldn't bring myself to change anything. As they walked past Marco's own grave, Vittorio paused and looked at the headstone. We should take that down. Leave it, Marco said quietly. Let everyone think I'm still dead.
For now.
It's an advantage. They won't see me coming. Vittorio studied his son's face and saw something new there. The boy who'd disappeared 2 weeks ago had returned as someone harder, smarter, more dangerous. The explosion had killed Marco, Leone the teenager. But it had forged Marco, Leone the survivor. All right, Vittorio agreed. We'll use it. Let you stay dead a little longer. But Marco. Yes. When this is over, when the Volkovs are gone and the family is secure, you get to choose who you want to be. Not a Mafia heir. Not a soldier.
Just
you. Marco looked up at his father, surprised. I mean it, Vittorio continued. I built this empire thinking I was protecting you, but it almost got you killed. So when we're done cleaning up this mess, you decide your own future, whatever that looks like. Marco felt tears threatening again. What if I choose to stay, to help rebuild? Then we rebuild together, as partners, not as boss and heir, but as father and son who trust each other. Marco nodded, unable to speak. They walked out of the cemetery side by side, leaving Angelo's body behind like the betrayal it represented. The first war was over, but the second was just beginning. 6 days later, the trap was set. The warehouse district looked abandoned, but every shadow held one of Vittorio's men. Snipers on rooftops. Enforcers in empty buildings. 20 loyal soldiers, handpicked and sworn to secrecy, waiting for the Volkov brothers to arrive. Marco sat in a surveillance van with Santino, monitoring 6 different camera feeds on laptop screens. His shoulders still ached, but proper medical care had stopped the infection. He looked less like a fugitive now, and more like what he was, a soldier preparing for war. They're 10 minutes out, Santino reported, checking his phone. 2 cars. Dmitri, Alexei, and 6 bodyguards. Good. Marco's fingers flew across the keyboard, executing the final stage of his plan. Once they're inside, I'll trigger the signal jammer. Cut their communications. They'll be isolated. Vittorio's voice crackled through the earpiece. And you're sure they'll come? They'll come, Marco replied. The message said you wanted to negotiate Angelo's territory transfer. That you're too broken to fight anymore and just want to minimize bloodshed. They think you're surrendering. In truth, the message had come from Marco, sent from Angelo's phone using the access codes he'd stolen. To the Volkovs, it looked like Angelo was still alive and facilitating Vittorio's defeat. They had no idea they were walking into an ambush. The black Mercedes SUVs pulled into the warehouse compound exactly on schedule. Dmitry Volkov stepped out first, his scarred face illuminated by the security lights Marko had deliberately left on. Alexei followed, flanked by 6 armed men, professional, alert, expecting negotiation but prepared for violence. "Where is he?" Dmitry called out in accented English. "Leon, we're here to talk." Vittorio emerged from the main warehouse, alone and apparently unarmed, his hands visible. He looked tired, older, exactly the image they expected. "Dmitry."
Alexei. Vittorio nodded.
"Thank you for coming. Where's Angelo?" Alexei's cold eyes scanned the area. "He said you wanted to discuss terms." "Angelo's dead," Vittorio said flatly. Both brothers tensed, hands moving toward weapons. 6 nights ago. Cemetery ambush. Didn't work out the way he planned. Vittorio's voice was calm, almost casual. "See, I know everything. The offshore accounts. The supply chain corruption. The warehouse explosion that was supposed to kill me." Dmitry's expression hardened. "Then you know resistance is pointless. We own half your suppliers. 1/4 of your soldiers are on our payroll. You can't win this war." "You're right," Vittorio agreed. "I can't. But my son can." Confusion flickered across both brothers' faces. "Your son is dead," Alexei said. "Actually," Marco's voice echoed through speakers Santino had installed throughout the compound. "I'm not." The lights went out. In the sudden darkness, chaos erupted. The Volkov's men drew weapons, shouting in Russian, forming a protective circle around their bosses. But Vittorio had already disappeared into the shadows. Emergency lighting kicked in, dim red bulbs that cast everything in blood-colored darkness. Enough to see shapes, but not enough to aim properly. "It's a trap," Dmitry shouted. "Fall back to the vehicles." But when they turned, the SUVs were already disabled, tires slashed, engines dead. Marco's doing, accomplished remotely through the vehicle's wireless systems while they were parked. "You're not going anywhere," Marco's voice continued through the speakers. "You tried to kill my father. You tried to kill me. And you thought you could steal everything my family built." Gunfire erupted as the Volkov's men fired blindly at the speakers. But Vittorio's soldiers were invisible in the darkness, positioned perfectly, waiting.
"Now."
Vittorio's command cut through the chaos. The ambush was surgical. Flash grenades disoriented the bodyguards. Vittorio's men emerged from concealment with precision, taking down the Volkov's soldiers one by one. Not killing. Vittorio wanted them alive for questioning, but incapacitating with ruthless efficiency. Within 90 seconds, all 6 bodyguards were on the ground, wounded or unconscious. Dmitry and Alexei stood back to back, weapons drawn, surrounded. The warehouse lights came back on, full brightness this time. Vittorio stood 15 feet away, gun trained on Dmitry. Behind him, 20 armed men formed a semicircle. And walking through the warehouse entrance, very much alive, was Marco Leone. Alexei's face went pale.
"Impossible."
"The explosion killed nobody," Marco finished, stopping beside his father. "Accept your plan." Dmitry's calculating mind was already working. "You can't kill us. We have connections. Diplomatic immunity. Our organization will." "Your organization is finished," Marco interrupted. He held up a tablet, showing a live feed of simultaneous raids happening across the city. "Right now, federal agents are seizing your businesses, your safe houses, your bank accounts. Everything."
"How?"
Dmitry's voice shook with rage. "I sent them everything," Marco explained. "Financial records, communications, video evidence of your criminal conspiracy. They've been building a case for 3 days. You're not walking away from this." Alexei laughed bitterly. "You involve the feds? You broke the code. Every family in this city will turn on you." "Maybe," Vittorio said, "but you won't be around to see it." He lowered his gun slightly. "Not surrendering, repositioning. You have 2 choices," Vittorio continued. "Option 1, you talk. Tell us which of my people you corrupted, which suppliers you turned, which operations you compromised. You give us everything we need to rebuild. In exchange, you get to live in a federal prison but alive. And option 2? Dmitri asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. You refuse. And I let my son decide what happens to you. Vittorio glanced at Marco. He's earned that right. Marco stepped forward, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he simply stared at the two men who'd tried to kill him and destroy his family. Then he spoke, his voice steady. I spent 2 weeks living like a ghost. Hiding. Bleeding. Watching my father grieve for me. All because you wanted money and power. He pulled out his phone. I have a federal prosecutor on speed dial. They're waiting for my call. If I press send, you go into custody right now.
Clean arrests.
Legal justice. You'll spend decades in prison, but you'll live. Marco's finger hovered over the screen. Or, he continued, I put the phone away, and I let my father's men handle this the old way. Your bodies disappear. Nobody asks questions. The Volkov family becomes a cautionary tale. Dmitri and Alexei exchanged glances. Choose quickly, Marco said. My patience died in that explosion. 3 months later, the cemetery looked different in autumn. Leaves covered the ground in gold and red. The air smelled like rain and earth. Vittorio stood at Marco's grave, still there, still marked with his son's name and dates. They decided to leave it as a memorial, a reminder of what they'd survived. Marco joined him, carrying fresh flowers. They placed them together on the headstone. The Volkovs talked, Marco said quietly. Every name, every account, every operation. The feds have enough to dismantle their entire organization. And our family? Rebuilding. The suppliers are coming back. The corrupted soldiers are gone. It'll take time, but we're stronger now. More careful. Vittorio nodded, staring at the grave. I buried your body here, but not my hope. Marco smiled at the echo of his father's words from that first day. You never lost me, Papa. I was just trying to come home. They stood in silence, father and son, survivors of a war that had nearly destroyed them both. Ready to go? Vittorio asked finally. Marco took one last look at his own grave. The boy buried there, the innocent 16-year-old who'd followed his father's consigliere into a warehouse, was truly gone. But someone new had emerged from that explosion. Someone harder. Smarter. Forged in fire and deception. Yeah, Marco said. I'm ready. They walked away together, leaving the grave behind. Because the dead couldn't protect the living. But the living, working together, trusting each other, could protect everything that mattered.